Okay. Out of the Silent Planet. I meant to check one of my copies today because I've got a pretty old copy. If I remember correctly, this is first published in 38 or 39. Probably the best individual study, if you're interested, of the Space Trilogy, or what also gets called the Ransom Trilogy, is this book by David Dowling, which I'll try to remember to bring Tuesday. Keep losing my days. Titled Planets in Peril, a study of C.S. Lewis's Ransom Trilogy, I think is the subheading of it. Downing has also written a few articles about this, one of them going into the numerological symbolism and some of the other stuff that Lewis does in these novels. I want to jump right into it without really giving any other kind of background. I want to skip the first 2 or 3 chapters. Notice, by the way, how our protagonist's name, Elwyn, computer's really hot, Ransom. Okay? We're going to hear some talk later on as to what his name means, but this is from Old English. Okay, the L, Win. Win means friend. Okay. L, you might think that it's like from Old English, elf, okay, meaning elf friend. No, because Lewis changes the meaning around a little bit and puts it within this context of El, I can never remember if it's 2 L's or 1, I think it's 1. El Dilla friend, and we'll talk about what the El Dilla are in a minute. How many of you, if any of you, have finished this? Anybody? Only 3 of you, okay. Well, we're going to try and finish it today.
I did about 5 years ago.
Okay. We're going to try and get through it all today so that we can somewhat get back on track. And you notice at the beginning, Elwyn Ransom, he's off on vacation. He's on a walking vacation in England. You have to understand a little bit about England. There are all of these public walking paths all over. And when you get to a piece of private property, and let's say that private property has fencing, okay, and your path comes right to there, almost always at that private property right here will be a stile that you can climb over the fence, and then there will be a step like on the other side. Because in England, there are certain footpaths that even go across, quote unquote, private property, that the footpaths are public. Okay? So this is what he's doing. He's off for a period of time just walking around. He's unmarried. It's out of term. He doesn't have anything better to do, apparently. So he makes his way on, and we see him run into the house with the woman, okay, who's wondering about her son. He says he'll try to do something about it. And then he goes to the next home where he runs into Weston and Devine. Okay? Devine is somebody he knew from college days, but he really didn't like. You know, a know-it-all, popular, rich, all that kind of stuff. And Weston is a world-famous physicist. And the next thing he knows, he wakes up. And in my version, and you've all got different ones, this is on page 32, which is about the second or third page into chapter 5. Okay? It's after that really big, long paragraph early in that chapter. Paragraph begins, all this, as I have said. The paragraph after that. Ransom has woken up, and he now realizes he's on a spaceship. Okay? He's leaving Earth, and we get this description. Ransom, as time wore on, became aware of another and more spiritual cause for his progressive lightening and exaltation of heart. The nightmare long engendered in the modern mind by the mythology that follows in the wake of science was falling of the black cold vacuity, the utter deadness which was supposed to separate the worlds. He had not known how much it affected him till now, now that the very name space, the radiance in which they swam. He could not call it dead. He felt life pouring into him from it every moment. How indeed should it be otherwise, since out of this ocean the worlds and all their life had come. He had thought it barren, that his whose blazing and innumerable offspring looked down nightly even upon the earth with so many eyes, and here with how many more, etc. And he quotes Milton to himself. So what's this first realization that he has?
That space isn't so empty.
Space isn't empty. What else about it?
It's alive.
How?
Fruitful. It's like a womb bursting world.
Okay? It's pregnant, as it were, with purpose, or with intent, with meaning. It doesn't mean if he were to step outside the spaceship, there'd be people or things or whatever all around him. But he feels, he says, or he thinks, he feels it coursing with life. Like there's a steady drumbeat outside. Okay? And he compares that thinking to what he used to think. And you have this wonderful line. A nightmare long engendered in the modern mind by the mythology that follows in the wake of science was falling off him. Okay, so what's the mythology that he had that is now leaving him?
Science. Or the alienation that follows the scientific world.
Okay,
It's what he knew to be factual, what he knew to be true.
factual?
To him, he thinks it's fact.
Okay. What, if anybody knows, what famously occurred, and this might be real ultra trivia and you may have no idea, what famously occurred on October 31st, 1938 in the United States? Anybody know?
Was it War of the Worlds?
Yes,
Broadcast, wasn't it?
yes.
And everybody believed that it was actually happening.
Orson Welles, his Mercury Theater, produced War of the Worlds via radio. Obviously, that's all there's. And the way he did it was there was a brief beginning intro that said, this is a dramatization, but they only did that once. So that when people turned on the radio, it sounded like a live broadcast of Martians invading. We used to listen when I was a little kid. We used to listen to that growing up. Used to listen to it a lot. Invading this small town in New Jersey, and then it's newsflash from this place in New York, etc. And you have the things spreading, etc. It was so realistic, so believed. People literally committed suicide that night, thinking they were being invaded by Martians. Okay. Jump from there to Independence Day. Not the real July 4th, but the movie with Jeff Goldblum and what's his name? Aliens. Pick your, Aliens movie, because in all of them, what does the alien look like?
Monsters.
It's a monster.
So
Okay.
the fiction that's off of them is that they're not antagonistic towards
Yes,
humans.
this is the mythology that's falling away from him. That everything that's out there has got to be monstrous, has got to be horrible. Or, in the case of just what here he refers to as space, dead. Okay. Later on, he's going to talk about space a little bit more. So, let's go back to the end of that quote. Before he quotes the lines from Milton, he thinks to himself, no, space is the wrong word. After all, what does space mean? the emptiness between things, right? There's space between Paul and I. I can't go like this and go space. There's something there, okay? He says no. Space is the wrong name. Older thinkers have been wiser when they named it simply the heavens. Okay? And then he quotes Milton and such. So he's given duties, usually cooking and cleaning, while he is in space. And as they get closer and closer to the planet that they're going to, things start to change a little bit. They get to a planet, and Ransom is the first one out. Okay, Weston forces him out by gunpoint. And we're told that chapter 7, several paragraphs in, the paragraph that begins, he scrambled through and rose to his feet. Okay? Towards the middle of that paragraph. Ransom sticks his head out the porthole. Why would he see colors but not things? Eraser. Because if you have no knowledge what the thing is, or even what its shape is, what are you left with?
A color.
Color. Okay? So he doesn't see things, all he sees is this, kaleidoscope of colors. He knew nothing yet well enough to see it. You cannot see things till you know roughly what they are. And this is one of the things he will have to learn as he looks around, and then later on as he meets creatures from this planet, and he learns their language and vocabulary, and he can start to figure out, okay, that's what that is. So he has a name. He can do what to it?
Own it.
Own it. He can appropriate it. It becomes familiar to him so that even for Ransom, after a few months of living on this planet, what has happened to him? He becomes accustomed to it. The things that he sees day in and day out, every morning, every afternoon, every evening, become familiar. And he no longer looks at them like he looked at them this moment, as brand new, as full of wonder and such. Okay? So he gets out and he suddenly realizes he was brought anything. Now, what mentality is playing upon him at that point? That old one. That old mythology that says, well, if there is life out there, it must be more intelligent than us and probably antagonistic to us, and we will need to be subservient to it, etc. Okay? So, he runs. Chapter 8. Ransom wakes up. He's been now there for a little bit, for a day or so. But we're told at the beginning of the chapter what has happened during the intervening travel from Earth to this planet. Notice he doesn't know where he is. Would it fatten him up?
No, it thinned him out.
It might have thinned him out. Okay. What would have happened to his muscles? They'd atrophy. Because he hasn't had to do anything. This is the problem of even now, NASA and such says, the space travel between here and, for example, Mars. It'll take approximately 3.5 years to get to Mars. How do you keep it so that an astronaut going to Mars stays in shape? It's kind of hard to do weight workouts in space. Because there's no weight. Unless you can somehow simulate gravity. Okay? So, Ransom's thinking of the Sorns, the things that Weston and Devine told him wanted him to be there for. Okay? And he walks and walks and walks. He goes across gullies. He sees plants. He doesn't know what night's going to be like because this is his first day. He's thinking it's going to be cold. Okay? And he wakes up the next morning, chapter 9, and he's thirsty. Well, here's a problem. he doesn't know if there's drinkable water on Malacandra. He doesn't know it's Malacandra yet. But he's lying there, and he drinks, because he figures, I can either die of thirst or I can die poisoned by whatever this is. And he drinks, and it's good to drink. Okay? We're going to skip a bunch of pages again. And he sees about a quarter mile away, a couple pages into the chapter, about 3 pages in, he sees a moving shape. He recognizes it immediately as a swan. Okay? Ransom keeps going. And then he sees this other creature. He comes to a body of water, and he comes to this other creature. And here I want to spend just a little bit of time. And we're told, as he's drinking the water, he sees this creature, and he sees eyes and a mouth. This is the chapter, the paragraph that begins, "There was no sound of pursuit." And about a third of the way in, he sees it, and then he saw eyes and a mouth, a puffing mouth, bearded with bubbles. More of the thing came up out of the water, gleaming black, splashes and wallows to the shore, rising on its hind legs, 6 or 7 feet high, too thin for its height, like everything in Malacandra. It had a coat of thick black hair, lucid as sealskin, very short legs with webbed feet, a broad beaver-like or fish-like tail, strong limbs with webbed claws or fingers, and something halfway up its belly that he took to be its genitals. Kind of like a penguin, kind of like an otter, kind of like a seal. Okay? But out of proportion. Okay? Too slender. He says, kind of like a giant stoat. A stoat's kind of like a ferret, but a 7-foot tall ferret, essentially. My son would just go absolutely bananas because he has 2 ferrets. Okay, big round head. And he's sitting there and he's just looking at it. And notice we're told, there comes a point at which the actions of fear and precaution are purely conventional, no longer felt. Ransom lay perfectly still because he doesn't want to draw attention. The thing suddenly moves, okay, and it starts to speak. And Ransom immediately begins to think, a new language. Why? He's a professor of philology. Philology, love of words, love of language. And he starts to think, an introduction to the Malacandrian language, the lunar verb, a concise Martian English dictionary, etc. Okay? He rises to his knees, the creature leaps back, etc. He shouts to the creature, it comes back. And what do we see? We see an instruction or an introduction in how to learn a foreign language. When I was an undergraduate student, I was taking a linguistics class, and a gentleman came to Pike Institute, it's either for or in, linguistics, or SIL. If you ever do anything on your computer with what you need for whatever website, because they do translation work. They do a lot of work with, for example, or they used to, the people with Wycliffe Bible translators to help teach individuals how to speak varieties of language and such. Well, Pike came to our class. He's a founder of this thing. He's a founder of a branch of linguistics called tegmemics. Okay? Pike came to our classroom, and the linguistics prof got somebody on campus. Got somebody from the campus who was a native of, I don't remember, someplace in Africa, that knew a language that Kenneth Pike didn't know because he knew like 20 or 30, because this is what he did for a living. And they did a demonstration in learning language. Okay? So you had this student who was speaking, I don't know, Kosian or something like that. And Pike, and they began with, Pike had a few individuals point to them, so they would say the word. Okay? Just like we see here. Cross. Man, says Ransom. Man. Picks up a handful of earth. Handra. Ransom, Andra. And then Ransom goes, Malak. Malak is a prefix. Andra means the earth, the world, the stuff, okay? And when Handra comes after a hard sound, the H drops off. Same kinds of things happen in the English language, okay? As an example, you've probably, if you've ever been to a church before where they've done something somewhere that had anything to do with King James English, you will hear thine arm, or, sorry, it should be Y, I'm thinking Middle English, thine eye. Why not thy arm? Like thy leg, thy hand. Hallowed be thy name.
The vowel?
Yes. It's because this word begins with a vowel, so you tack on a nasal at the end of the preceding, okay, pronoun.
It's an actual vowel, not a vowel sound.
Yeah. Because you wouldn't say thine history. It'd be thy history. Unless you drop this, which some do. Okay? So, he's starting to learn the language. This just, pleases him to no extent. Okay, keep in mind, he's a language geek. I mean, this is like Bill Gates finding the, Ur's software code or something. Okay? So, he and Ransom converse back and forth, and we're told the last paragraph of the chapter. It was only many days later that Ransom discovered how to deal with these sudden losses of confidence. They arose when the rationality of the cross tempted you to think of it as a man. That is, the cross has rationality. It has reason. It has logic. And as he would be talking with it, he would start to think as if it was human. Then it became abominable. Because after all, what does it look like? It doesn't look like us, yeah, a 7-foot ferret. Okay? It became abominable. A man 7 feet high with a snaky body, covered face and all, with thick black animal hair, whiskered like a cat. But starting from the other end, you had an animal with everything an animal ought to have. Glossy coat, liquid eye, sweet breath, white as teeth, and then added to all of that, what? As though paradise had never been lost and the earliest dreams were true, the charm of speech and reason. What's one of the things Tolkien writes about in the fairy story essay? That we long escaped from or to. He says, to communicate with things other than ourselves. In The Lord of the Rings, it's trees. Okay? Here, it's my black lab, elongated, essentially. So it's an animal. Nothing could be more disgusting than the one impression. What's the one impression? The long snake-like human that doesn't look like a human because he's covered with faculty of something like with the idea of a werewolf. It's part man, but part something completely different. The other what? The animal that you can talk to. The Aslan, as it were. Or think any of the other animals that speak in Chronicles of Narnia. It all depended on the point of view. In other words, it all depended on how one took in that creature. Well, what is point of view part of? It's part of mythology. That is, it's part of how we see. Well, how we see is affected by what we believe, whether what we believe is something that has been reasoned through or something we've just adopted. Okay? So, next paragraph, next chapter, I think we're going to skip most of, Ransom just goes back to the Hausa community, I guess, and kind of becomes one with them, etc. He lives with them, he learns from them, he is babysat and babysits, essentially. So go on to chapter 11. He can now recognize a male and female by sight. He understands certain things. Okay. He discovers their agriculture, we're told. He is able to start answering some questions they have about him. And they want to know, where do you come from? And we're told in the paragraph that begins, this is a couple pages in, about 3 pages in, the real revolution in his understanding. Okay? He tries to use little words and explain things to them in childish language. Well, why does he do that? Okay, you have to start at the beginning. Why else? Because he thinks of them intellectually as children. Why? Because they're intellectual, they are rational, but they're not human. And so he thinks naturally, talks down to them. And what are we told? Ransom, who had deliberately given a childish version of the truth in order to adapt it to the supposed ignorance of his audience, was a little annoyed to find Flora painfully explaining to him that he could not live in the sky because there was no air in it. He says, oh, I came from the sky. And they're like, dummy, you can't come from the sky because there's nothing to breathe up there. So he must have come from a hand drive. He's like, okay. So he was able to point out Earth to them, and they called it Fulcandra. Why do you call it Fulk, he says. Why silent? No one knows. He comes from the silent planet. The Saroni would know. And he's like, why? Why would the Saroni know? Okay? And they talk to him about the Saroni, and they talk to him about Oyarsa. He's trying to hammer down this idea of Oyarsa. And here's what he finally gathers. Oyarsa 1 lived at Meldalorn. Doesn't know what Meldalorn is, he just knows it's a place. 2, Oyarsa knows everything and ruled everyone. 3, he'd always been there, or it had always been there. And 4, it was not a cross, nor was it one of the Saroni. So it must be the highest form of life. Okay? We're told. And so Ransom asks, did Oyarsa make the world? He's thinking, Oyarsa's God. And they almost bark in their fervor of their denial. And he's like, whoa. They said, no. Did you not know that Maladil the Young had made and still ruled the world? He's like, where's Maladil? Where does he live? With the old one. Okay, who's the old one? Where was the old one? He's not that sort. Notice the presupposition in Ransom's question. Where is the old one? Where indicates geographical locality. A particular place. And they go, no. He doesn't live anywhere. He's everywhere, in other words. Okay, so Ransom's like, don't quite get you. So they keep talking about Maladil and how Maladil is a spirit without body parts or passions. Harasa, he's not Hnau. Ransom, what is Hnau? You are Hnau. I am Hnau. The Saroni are Hnau. The Fifiltrigi are Hnau. Then they tell him about the Fifiltrigi. Okay. And they show some of the things that the Fifiltrigi make. So Ransom's trying to understand the politics of the world. Who rules? Well, why does he need to know this?
So he knows who not to offend.
Okay, so he knows who not to offend. Why else?
Naturally choose sides.
Natural to choose sides.
Also get the answers that he needs.
So he can get the answers he needs. How about because in his world, somebody always rules? In other words, this is his only frame of reference for thinking. He can't, we use the phrase all too often, I would say today, think outside the box. Even when people think outside the box today, what are they merely doing? Thinking inside a larger box. Okay? Well, Ransom's box doesn't allow for the possibility that they're trying to get him to understand. So he asks, which of Hnau rules? Oyarsa, is he Hnau? And they said, no, we already told you, dummy, he's not Hnau. So they said, you need to talk to the Saroni. Okay? So Ransom, okay, so the Saroni know more than the Harasa? And they're like, no. Well, the Saroni know more abstracty kind of stuff, but the Harasa know more real world kind of stuff. So he's thinking, Saroni, those are my kind of people. Professors, have little contact with the real world, live up in clouds and such. The intelligentsia, he thinks. They must be the real rulers. Okay? He's got to talk to them or tell them about Earth and what it's like. Okay? They tell him about the Hanakra and what Hanakra punting is. And an Eldil comes, and we're told that Ransom can't see it. We're not told what an Eldil is, only that whatever it is, Ransom can't see it. Okay? So they get ready for the Hanakra punt. And they keep talking, and Ransom's still trying to understand the political power divisions in this world. Look at the beginning of chapter 12. And so Ransom asks, do the Saroni and Harasa and Fifiltrigi ever go out like this, with weapons, against each other? Why? Well, what if they both wanted one thing and neither would give it? Well, what kind of thing? Food. Well, if somebody else wanted food, we'd give it to them. But what if they didn't? What if you didn't have enough food for yourselves? Well, Maladil would always provide. Okay? Ransom, we're told, found this difficult. And so they talk about children and the begetting of children and pleasure and such. And the Hyoi teaches Ransom, the thing is a pleasure, Haman wants it again. This is Ransom speaking now. He might want the pleasure more often than the number of young that could be fed. Hyoi's sitting there going, what? What do you mean? You mean that he might do it not only in 1 or 2 years of his life, but again? Yes. Why? Would he want his dinner all day or want to sleep after he had slept? I don't understand. In other words, dinner has an appropriate time. Right? Lunch has an appropriate time, etc. Sleep has an appropriate time. According to Hyoi, okay, in Harasa culture, sex or reproduction has an appropriate time. It's not multiple times. To which Ransom replies, yeah, but dinner comes every day. Feed me, You say it comes only once while the cross lives, but it takes his whole life. In other words, he's preparing for that. But the pleasure he must be content only to remember. It's like saying, my food I must be content to eat. The pleasure he must be content only to remember. Hyoi takes that and says, yeah, so that is part of the pleasure. Ransom, I don't understand. A pleasure is full grown only when it is remembered. Now, think of a pleasure, a non-sexual pleasure, let's say. That, that's what he's talking about. You were speaking, Haman, as if the pleasure were one thing and the memory another. It's all one thing. Okay? What you would call remembering is the last part of the pleasure, as the kra is the last part of a poem. When you and I met, the meeting was over very shortly. It was nothing. Now it is growing something as we remember it. In other words, what's it becoming in the mind of the rememberer? Like a story, an epic that goes on and on. Ransom, I still don't get you. And so they start to talk about a bent poem and the idea of bentness. So Ransom asks, are there no bent Harasa? He says, I have heard of something like that once. So what is Ransom teaching him? Sin? Non-trueness? Okay. And Ransom then, this fairly long paragraph goes into thinking about himself. What does all this conversation tell me about the history of man? And so he says, when he hears Huey speaking in, and Huey says, undoubtedly Maladon made us so. How could there ever be enough to eat if everyone had 20 young? Okay, and he keeps going on. And Ransom says, all the same. Oh, that's different. I long to kill this Sennacherib as he also longs to kill me. I hope that my ship will be the first. If he kills me, my people will mourn, my brothers will desire still more to kill him. But they will not wish that there were no Hanakri. Hanaraki. Why? Because, like Tolkien says in the fairy story essay, a world without I can't say that, would be the ability of dragons is a richer, fuller world. Okay? So they talk about killing the Hanakra and about death and what happens when one dies. And so they get ready for the Hanakra and Ransom goes off with Huey. And as they're in the water, on the boat, in the water, whichever way you want to put it, another Eldil comes to them. And Huey speaks to it. And the Eldil tells Huey, the man needs to go to Meldalorn, needs to see Oyarsa. Okay? Bent now of his own kind from Folkandra are following him. If they find him anywhere else, there will be evil. Okay? So what happens?
He doesn't go right away.
He doesn't go right away. And what happens?
One of the locals gets shot.
Yeah. Huey gets killed. Okay? But they have the Hanakra first. They kill the Hanakra. And then that's when Huey gets shot. Okay? So Ransom has got to now leave. He's got to make his way to Meldalorn. Do they give him a map? Do they show him how to get there? Do the Harassa even know how to get there? Apparently not. So they send him to find Ogre. So Ransom starts to make his way. This is in chapter 14. And he is finally, he runs into chapter 15, Ogre. Okay? And we hear this come in small and booming voice. And the sword says, you must be from Folkandra. I mean, without even really asking any questions. And Ransom's like, why? Because you're small and thick, and that is how the animals ought to be made in a heavier world. Showing the Sorn understands what? Gravity, a little bit of basic physics. Okay?
Theoretical physics?
Yeah. And describe the Sorn. What's it look like? Okay, Huey was about 7 feet tall. This thing's like 16 feet tall. Spindly legs like a spider. So that when it sits on its rear, its knees come way up here, way above its head. It's not at all a pleasant looking thing, okay? So Ransom and Ogre talk and have a long discussion. And they talk about Oyarsa, they talk about Folkandra. Ransom gets some of his questions about the relationships among the Fifiltrigi and the Harassa and the Saroni answered.
What do you think of the representation of Earth, the representation they make of Ransom, and Ransom says that it's not accurate, but he says that it can't be, the alien says it can't be too accurate, or future generations won't believe it?
You mean the representation made by the Fifiltrigi when he gets to Meldalorn?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to it. Okay? Let's see here. About 5 pages or so into that chapter. Paragraph that begins, well then, that is the thing at the top of all bodies. Okay? Talking about something that moves so fast that it seems to be at rest and such. Okay? Augrey says at the end of that paragraph, it is strange that the Eldilla never visit Thulkendra. Ransom, of that I'm not certain. And he suddenly realizes that the recurrent human tradition of bright, elusive people, sometimes appearing on the earth, Albs, Devas, the like, might after all have another explanation than the anthropologists had yet given. In other words, maybe there really are angelic beings. All right? So he says, what does Oyarsa want from me? Augrey, don't know. Ransom, we have no Oyarsa in my world. That's another proof that you're from Thulkendra. Why? Because it's very likely if you had an Oyarsa, he would never speak to ours. How could he speak to yours? Millions of miles away. They wouldn't think of it like that. Okay? Ransom, do you mean he ordinarily receives messages from other planets? Like, they've got an interplanetary fax machine? He wouldn't think of it that way. Oyarsa would not say that he lives on Malacandra and that another Yarsa lives on another Earth. For him, Malacandra is only a place in the heavens. It is in the heavens that he and the others live. In other words, if anything, Malacandra, Paralandra, we're going to hear about, Thulkendra, and all the other Andras are more like spaces within the heavens. Keep in mind how we just defined a space earlier. A gap. So if this is the heavens, and here's Thulkendra, here's Malacandra, here's, Paralandra, all this communicating is going around in here, and these are like gaps in space, or the heavens. Okay? And then Ransom says, maybe I don't come from Thulkendra. And he says, well, let's see. I think you do. And he takes Ransom over to a telescope, and what does Ransom see? Look at this paragraph. He leaned forward with his elbows on the sill of the aperture, this last paragraph of chapter 15, and looked. He saw perfect blackness, and then seemingly an arm's length away, a bright disk about the size of a half crown. Most of its surface was featureless, shining silver. Towards the bottom, markings appeared, and below them a white cap. He wondered for a moment if it was Mars he was looking at. And then he realized, here's Northern Europe and a piece of North America. They were upside down with the North Pole at the bottom of the picture, and this somehow shocked him. But it was Earth he was seeing, even perhaps England, though the picture shook a little and his eyes were quickly getting tired. And he could not be certain that he was not imagining it, but it was all there in that little disc. Now, look at the places and names he gives. London, Athens, Jerusalem, Shakespeare. London, his own particular capital. Athens, why Athens? Okay.
Greek language.
Greek culture.
Reason.
Reason, why Jerusalem?
Faith.
Judeo-Christian tradition. Western culture comes out of Jerusalem and Athens. Okay. And then the pinnacle of Judeo-Christian culture, Shakespeare. There, everyone had lived and everything had happened. And there, presumably, his pack was still lying in the porch of an empty house near Stirk. Yep, that's my home. Okay? So, the next morning, he and make their way off. And I want to go to the end of that chapter. Last, about 4 or 5 paragraphs before the end. Okay? He's having a conversation with the Sorns, now multiple Sorns. They've talked about poetry, they've talked about birds and all this kind of stuff. And now Ransom is thinking about some of the other aspects of his world. The end of that is what we're told as a positive phrase for human history. War, slavery, prostitution. No music, no art, no beauty, humanity. War, slavery, and prostitution. And one of the little Sorn, it is because every one of them wants to be a little Oyarsa himself. Meaning what? How does every one of them want to be a little Oyarsa?
They all want to rule themselves or others.
Yes. Okay? But it's even more than that. I mean, that's entirely true. First of all, you have to understand what an Oyarsa is. Oyarsa isn't God. Okay? Oyarsa is the ruling intelligence of, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use an older phrase that kind of applies here, but it's a little bit different also. Ruling intelligence of a sphere. Okay? In the old Ptolemaic conception of the universe, okay, the world was made up, the universe was made up of these spheres. You had the earth, okay, at the beginning, or at the middle, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 spheres, okay. Each one of these is governed by a planet, right? Beyond that, you have another sphere, which is the Empyrean, and beyond that, you have another kind of sphere, which is where God is. So you have 9 spheres. And you have to think of them as real spheres. You have a little ball surrounded by a larger ball, by a larger ball, by a larger ball, okay? Well, each one of these spheres, as well as Earth, has a ruling intelligence. Okay? They have a planetary intelligence that governs, that rules that. Now, in part of the Middle Ages, it was thought that the ruling intelligence for Earth was like the goddess Fortune, or in some versions, the goddess Nature. Okay? But, St. Paul talks about the prince of the power of this air. Okay? That's what Lewis is playing with there.
Would that be different than the prime mover?
Prime mover's back here.
Okay.
Prime mover, that's Aristotelian language, that's God. Okay? And all he means by prime mover is that it is God that makes all of this move. First mover. Okay?
All of those little dots are Yarsas, different.
Yes. Oyarsas, there is an Oyarsa on each planet. Okay? So, every one of them wants to be a little Oyarsa himself, meaning wants to be the self-ruling intelligence. Wants to be. You're not alone. Captain of, down to brass tacks. In this classroom right now, are you masters of your own destiny? No, you don't assign your grades. I do. Does that mean I'm master of my own destiny? No. Okay. They cannot help it. There must be rule, yet how can creatures rule themselves? Beasts must be ruled by Hnau, and Hnau by Eldilla, and the Eldilla by Malodil. These creatures have no Eldilla. They're like one trying to lift himself by his own hair. You ever hear the phrase, pull yourself by your own bootstraps? Think about what that literally means. That is about the most asinine statement in the world. How do you pull yourself up with your bootstraps? What are you going to... it's like the old, what was it? Gary Larson cartoon. There's a kid standing at a door, and he's sitting there pushing as hard as he can. Paul knows which one it is. And the door says down below, pull, and it's Midvale School for the Gifted. Okay, genius level. Okay? They are like one trying to lift himself by his own hair, or one trying to see over a whole country when he's on a level with it. Or like a female trying to beget young on herself. 2 things about our world immediately stick in Ransom's mind. One was the extraordinary, in their minds, extraordinary degree to which problems of lifting, carrying, absorbed our energy. Okay. Actually, I don't want to skip the rest of that. Go on to 17. He makes his way to Meldalorn, and how far is this before the end? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. About 8 pages in, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 before the end of the chapter. Ransom's been, he's walked around the little island of Meldalorn and such. He's met the Fiffletriggy, who's inscribing pictures in the rocks and stuff. He realizes, because he's heard Ross tell him, that the island is full of Eldilla. Okay? And he looks at the pictures that the Fiffletriggy is carving. And the middle of that paragraph, many of the pictures he could make nothing of. He sees one that he realizes this has got to be Ilyarsa and Meldalorn, and there's other things going on. And then he looks at another, and there's the sun, unmistakably, at the center of the disk. And around this, the concentric circles revolved. In the first and smallest of these was pictured a little ball on which rode a winged figure, something like Ilyarsa, but holding what appeared to be a trumpet. What is that? It's a figure from mythology.
Hermes?
Or Mercury. It's the same, the messenger. Notice how what Lewis does here is he changes the Ptolemaic conception slightly. How? He changes it to fit modern science, where the sun is the center of, here it's not the universe, it's the solar system. So, he sees a little figure with a trumpet. In the next, a similar ball carried another of the flaming figures. This one, instead of even the suggested face, had 2 bulges, which after long inspection, he decided were meant to be udders, or breast of a female mammal. And now he suddenly realizes, Venus. So you have Mercury, messenger, herald, Venus, and Ransom realizes, wow, their mythology is just like ours. The problem would have occupied him longer if a natural curiosity did not draw his eye to the next ball, because he knows his astronomy. Mercury, Venus, home. And here's where he sees. The ball was there, but where the flame-like figure should have been, a deep depression of irregular shape had been cut, as if to erase it. He looked at the next circle, no ball. Instead, the bottom of this circle touched the top of the big segment filled with Malacandrian seeds. So he realizes, Malacandra is Mars, because that's where I am. Okay? And so he talks to the Fiffletriggy and says, why are you making me look like that? Okay? Fiffletriggy says, come and see yourself. Ransom obeyed. He sees a picture of the planets, not now arranged to make a map of the solar system, but advancing in single procession towards the spectator. And he thinks, I expect it's like me as I look to your people. But it's not how they would draw me in my own world. Because what has he seen? A human form like a stock-like dummy, as thick as it was tall, sprouting about the head and neck into something that looked like fungus. Well, how long has Ransom been on Malacandra? A few months. He's got hair all over. The Fiffletriggy. No, I do not mean it to be too like. Too like, and they will not believe it. Those who are born after. Okay? Why? He's saying it should be figurative, not entirely representational. That is, it should suggest rather than merely portray. Okay? So Ransom says, how do you guys all speak the same language? You and the Sorns and the Hross and such. So they go on and they talk, and we find out the Fiffletriggy are the smiths. They're the makers of things. And the Hross are the producers of grain and vegetation and that kind of stuff.
What is he getting at in the danger of actually portraying it versus just suggesting?
I'm not sure.
Is it because of the Because it's supposed to be a heavier earth, if they were taller or thinner, it wouldn't look like it would look scientifically inaccurate.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that because Earth is different, is a heavier planet, denser planet, has more gravity and such, that those who come after wouldn't believe how that would look if you really portrayed him accurately, because they would say, no, as you said, they ought to be shorter and squatter. Go back and look at the description again. 3 figures, all of which Ransom stood as the model. He recoiled from them in disgust, even allowing for the strangeness of the subject from a point of view, and for the stylization of the art. Still, he thought the creature might have made a better attempt at the human form than these stock-like dummies. Okay? I do not mean it to be too like. Too like, they will not believe it, those who are born after. He added a good deal more, which was difficult to understand, but while he was speaking, it dawned upon Ransom that the odious figures were intended as an idealization of humanity. That is, not humanity as they are, humanity as they should be. Okay, but again, from whose perspective? From the Fiffletrigge's perspective. The Fiffletrigge looks at this and doesn't see it as something, to use Ransom's term, odious. He looks at it as something noble, as it were. Okay? Conversation languished for a little, and Ransom tries to change the subject. Now notice, Lewis says that even Ransom doesn't understand this description. Okay? So maybe it'll come up later, not here, but in one of the other novels. I want to leave it at that. So chapter 18. Now Ransom gets ready for the meeting with Oyarsa. He's at the top of Meldalorn, and notice this. You have here's land, here's a lake. In the middle of the lake is an island, and the island is shaped like a mountain or a hill, so that you have a top to it, so that the very top up here, it's like a garden. Okay? Circular garden with row of trees around it, so it's walled off and hedged, protected. It's very, common image in medieval literature. Ransom realizes the place is full of Ildilla. The creatures are all lined up. Okay? And Ransom's making his way through the line, and he thinks maybe this is the exam, maybe this is the test. Every visible creature had risen to its feet, was standing more hushed than ever, head bowed. Ransom saw Oyarsa coming up between the long lines of sculptured stones. He knew it from the faces of the Malacandrians, but then he saw Oyarsa himself. Merest whisper of light. Okay? And Oyarsa spoke. Ransom hears the words, and we're told it's a voice, as one of the Rasa afterwards described to Ransom, with no blood in it. What does that mean, no blood in it? Okay, not human, not organic, lifeless. It's like if a rock could speak, or crystal, or glass. Clear? Yes. Okay? No throatiness to it. And so Oyarsa says, why are you afraid, Ransom? You. I'm afraid of you, because you're unlike me, and I cannot see you. Those are not great reasons. Really? Ransom is unlike Oyarsa. Oyarsa is not afraid of Ransom. No, because, Ransom isn't a great ruling intelligence of an entire planet. But he says, you're unlike me, and I see you, but I see you faintly. But we're not utterly unlike. We are both copies of Maladil. No. You're afraid for something else. Ransom doesn't say anything. No. You were afraid back before you even landed on my planet. Ransom's like, well, not fair. You were eavesdropping. Okay? Ransom, I don't understand. Did you send for me from Thulkandra? Yes. Did not the other two tell you this? Why did you come with them unless you meant to obey my call? My servants could not understand their talk to you. Your servant, I don't understand. Go ahead, ask. Where are your servants? In the heavens? Yes. But you're here. As I am. No. You're here as you are, but I'm not really quite here the same way that you are here. He says, Malacandra, like all worlds, floats in heaven. Creatures of your kind, what? Drop out of heaven into a world. But for us, the worlds are places in heaven. So, Ransom, you knew about our journey before we left Thulkandra? No. Ransom, I don't get it, he's lost. It was not always so, Oyarsa goes on. Once we knew the Oyarsa of your world. It was brighter and greater than I. Then we did not call it Thulkandra. And then he goes on and says, this is a long story, it's an old story, and it's a painful story. And he talks about how Thulkandra became silent, how the Oyarsa of Thulkandra became bent. And he concludes that long paragraph with, we think that Malodil would not give it up utterly to the bent one, and there are strange stories among us. He's taken strange counsel and dared terrible things, wrestling with the bent one in Thulkandra. But of this we know less than you. It is the thing we desire to look into. Almost an exact quote of, and I can never remember the book, and I don't have it written down here, of St. Paul in one of his letters, that he says, what Christ did was something the angels desired to look into. Okay? So Ransom's silent. And then he goes on and says, my world's pretty wicked. Talks about how bent it is. Oyarsa says, I understand. Okay? And so Oyarsa explains how Weston and Divine came 2 years ago and how he asked for someone to come to him. And Ransom explains how bent their world is and how people are full of fear and such. And finally, Oyarsa says, skipping several paragraphs, the least of my servants could touch their ship before it reached Malacandra, while it was in the heaven, and make it a body of different movements, meaning an atom going here and an atom going there, and for you, no body at all. We know nothing since the day when the bent one sank out of heaven into the air of your world, wounded in the very light of his light. Why have you become afraid again? Ransom, because the way you're talking about time. Do you mean you remember? I do not understand. Did you not say this happened before there was life on Thulkandra? Yes. And you lived. Yes. Oyarsa said, I get it. You really are now. Meaning, you really are rational. You perceive deeper into the questions that I am stating. Okay? So, Ransom tells him the history of humanity. All the good parts and all the bad parts. Until he gets interrupted. And Weston and Divine are brought up. And we're going to skip a bunch of yeah.
But we first see Weston and Divine, they're more like Flibberty.
Fiffletriggy.
Thank you. They wear their stocking, it looks like, and their hair looks crazy.
And how rational do they appear? Do they talk to Oyarsa? To Oyarsa.
Talk to a bear that's meditating.
They talk to, a Hross, okay, that is meditating is a nice way of putting it. That's what I assume my students are doing when they're, that is sleeping because they think he's the head man, the witch doctor kind of a thing. Okay? In other words, they appear not to be now. They don't appear to be rational. Right? So Weston goes on, because he's now going to speak. And what does Weston tell them is the reason for their journey? Why are they there? Weston says, life. Life. This is about 1, 2, 3, 4 pages in or so, 4 or 5 pages in. Ransom's now translating for Oyarsa to Weston and such. And vice versa. Weston says, life, of course, she's ruthlessly broken down all obstacles. An interplanetary leap, which will perhaps place her forever beyond the reach of death. What is Weston interested in? Keeping man alive. How?
We go to other planets.
Yeah,
Using the resources.
by going to other planets if we need to. If we screw up this one, hop on to the next one. When we screw up that one, hopscotch on to the next one. What's important for Weston is keeping humanity alive. Is it necessarily that he's interested in keeping humanity in its present form? No. Okay? So Weston goes on, skipping another few paragraphs. I may fall, but while I live, I will not, with such a key in my hand, consent to close the gates of the future on my race. What lies in that future, beyond our present ken, passes imagination to conceive. It is enough for me that there is a beyond. Now, if you've ever read, I almost said James Joyce's Ulysses. It's not James Joyce. Alfred Lord Tennyson's Ulysses. This is almost the idea that Ulysses expresses at the end of that poem. It's the reason why Ulysses leaves Ithaca behind. Gets his old sailor friends, the guys who fought in the Trojan War with him, and they get on their boat, and he says to do what? To press onward. Never to lie behind and to suck my last breath as a frail old man, but to always press forward. Okay? That's kind of what Weston's getting at here. Okay? Oyarsa says, good, I'm glad I heard you. Why? Because you're not as bent as I thought. Because notice who Weston is not acting for. Himself. What about Divine? He's there solely for himself. He's there to get son's blood, gold. That's it. Okay? And so they keep talking. And Weston says, no care for Hnau, care for man. But if it is neither man's mind, which is the mind of all other Hnau, is not Malado maker of them all, nor his body, which will change. If you care for neither of these, what do you mean by man? That is, if it's not rationality and reason, and it's not the physical shape, what do you mean by man? Okay? Ransom tried to translate that, and Weston, me care for man. Me care. How's that for physicists speaking English? Me care for man. Care for our race, what man begets. You do not love any one of your own race. You would have let me kill Ransom. You do not love the mind of your own race, nor the body. Seems to me, thick one, that what you really love is no completed creature. Okay? I see now how the Lord of the silent world has bent you. There are laws that all Hnau know. Meaning, Hnau, whether they are of Thulkandra, or Paralandra, or Malakandra, or any of the other Andras. What are the laws? Pity, straight dealing, shame. We're right back there at the first chapter of Mere Christianity. Okay? And one of these is the love of kindred. Things like yourself. He has taught you, he, the bent elder. This one he's bent till it becomes folly and is set up thus bent to be a little blind Oyarsa in your brain. You love humanity more than anything else, and yet you hate, Oyarsa doesn't say this, but it's there. He hates individual people. I mean, Weston really is a misanthrope. Okay? And when asked why you love, you can't give an answer. You can't say why you want to spread humanity. Okay? So Oyarsa says, I'll tell you why. He has left you this one because a bent plow can do more evil than a broken one. Bent, not broken. He is only, but this one, talking about divine, who sits on the ground, he is broken, for he has nothing left in him but greed. So why is Weston more dangerous?
He's not broken.
How is he not broken yet?
He still has a little bit of the law in him, a little bit of goodness in him.
He's not motivated for himself. Everything divine does is about himself. What's in it for me? Okay? He is now only a talking animal. In my world, he could do more evil, no more evil than an animal. If he were mine, I'd unmake his body for this, for the hnau in it is already dead. So what does the hnau mean? Soul? Spirit? Mind? But if you were mine, I would try to cure you. It's almost like the difference is between, I don't think this is a perfect analogy, like the difference between Gollum and Saruman. Saruman, if he were quote unquote cured, be of much good? No. What's he live for? Himself. Saruman, not so much, or not as much. Okay? So they keep talking, and Oyarsa explains how thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, the Eldil of Fulcandra tried to reach out and touched Malacandra, and how Oyarsa had to dig the Handramit so that people could come down from the Harandra, the high ground, and live in the Handramit and live in such. So he says, we'll stop with this. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to send y'all back. It's not really my job. It's not really not my job. It's not my my right to unmake you. Right? Are they natives of his world? No, they're visitors. But he says, here's what I'll do. I'll give you 90 days to get back to your planet. If you're still in space or in the heavens, when that 90th day comes, poof. So you better get back within 90 days. So they make their trip back, and chapter 22 they land back on Earth. Ransom makes his way to a bar, asks for a pint of bitter. And at chapter 22 says, I think at this point, if I were guided by purely literary considerations, my story would end. But no, I've got to explain some things. And he goes on and he talks about Oyarses and Bernardus Silvestris, etc. If you do look up the word Oyarsis, it's real. It's not something Lewis invents. It's from the Middle Ages. Okay? And he talks about Ransom, and he finishes just before the postscript, second to the last paragraph. Okay? And they said, he's recounting what Ransom said, and they, he said, will easily find out you, me, and will easily identify Weston. Anyway, what we need for the moment is not so much a body of belief as a body of people familiarized with certain ideas. In other words, he is saying, we don't need people who believe certain things. We need people who are acquainted with ideas. What kind of ideas? Read the discarded image. The ideas that Lewis talks about there. The ideas that the world works in a particular fashion. A fashion that is scientifically disproven today. And yet, metaphorically or figuratively, we still use the image from the Middle Ages. We say the sun, where is it? It's that way. We say the sun rises in the east. The sun doesn't rise, does it? No, the earth moves. But we don't use the language of the earth moving. Why not? because it betrays our senses. Our senses tell us the sun's coming up in that direction. So our senses are scientifically inaccurate to the scientific truth. Similarly, when we see a beautiful rainbow, our senses don't tell us, well, golly gee, look at the beautiful refraction of the light by all the little water droplets in the sky, and the sunlight shining through, and the prism, refracting. No, we go, wow, look at that. Beautiful, or whatever. So he goes on. If we could even affect in 1% of our readers a changeover from the conception of space to the conception of heaven, we should have made a beginning. Okay? Now, I'll stop with this. After this book was, I think it was this book. It's either this book or the next one, was published. Lewis, might have been sometime in the 50s actually, he wrote a little essay in which he talks about watchful dragons. Okay? And what he means by that is he was amazed at the reviews this book got. Because it got pretty good reviews as science fiction. Pure science fiction. Okay? And what he was amazed at was that none of the reviewers saw, quote unquote, what he was doing in it. And he says in one of his lectures, I'll try and find where it is. He says in one of his lectures, that he discovered after writing this book that he was able to smuggle theology into romance, and nobody would have a clue that he was even doing it. For the simple reason that most of his readers in the 1940s had little to no understanding, his language, of theology. So that's what he began to do. I mean, just pick up any one of the Chronicles of Narnia. Okay? Which is why Tolkien hated them.
Yeah.
Chronicles of Narnia, because it was too allegorical. Allegorical and anachronistic. You shouldn't have Father Christmas in Narnia. Doesn't work, Okay? All right, Paralandra for Tuesday.